everyone. So today we are going to do chapter 11 of Mankiw, which is of DU Introductory Microeconomics, Public Good and Common Resources. So we essentially talk about goods which are to be provided by the government and have merits that these are not capable of being provided by the private sector. So let's see what kind of goods these are. So we consume many goods without paying for them. These goods are like parks, national defense, clean air. When goods don't have prices, then it's not that the private sector cannot really provide for them. How does the private sector provide for clean air, right? Anything that the private sector does will have costs attached to it, and people want clean air for free. So how does the private sector do that? So goods that have no prices, the private sector cannot function in that market, and it will fail to provide the socially efficient quantity of such goods. So private sector will not be looking at such goods at all. And it is the government which has to step into these goods to provide the socially efficient quantity of such goods. So what kind of goods are we talking about? Let's talk about that. So there are many kind of goods which are more suited for government consumption than private. One feature that we need to understand is excludability. Excludability is that when the consumption of a good can be excluded by a person, you can exclude a person from consuming something. Sometimes when it is excludable, the private sector can probably provide it. But what if the good is not excludable? Meaning, even if a person does not pay for it, he will still get the benefit of that good. That property is called excludability of provision of a good. Goods which are excludable, all private goods, house, food, but goods which are not excludable. What about when you can't stop someone from consuming it? For example, can you really stop someone from fishing in the oceans, right? Can you really stop someone from receiving a radio signal? Can you really stop someone from getting the benefits of a national defense? Can you really stop someone from using a public park? There are many goods which are not excludable. You cannot stop someone from using it. Then there are goods which are rival. The meaning of rival is that when you use a good, sometimes multiple people can use that good without it hampering the experience of any of them. So, for example, if I am watching a movie and till the point that there is no noise or nobody's disturbing me, 100 people can watch the movie in a theater. It doesn't matter to me whether it's me or it's 100 people. So that is called non-rival. So rivalry in consumption meaning that it is the property of a good where one's person use diminishes the other person's use. So when, for example, it's a burger, if I'm eating a burger, then obviously I can't share it with someone else. So that's rival. But like I said, a movie in a theater, it's non-rival as long as it is limited to the capacity of that theater. So that is another property. So now based on goods, displaying excludability and rivalry, can we group goods? So private goods, goods which are excludable and rival, goods which can be prevented. You can prevent someone from using it, and if one person uses it, the other person cannot get it. So this is a classic example of these goods being that can be provided by the private sector, right? So rival and excludable. But what if a good is not excludable and non-rival? So one person providing it does not diminishing the other person's use of it, and you cannot stop someone from using it also, like national defense. This kind of a scenario cannot be provided for by the private sector. It can only be provided by the government sector. So we will talk about this in more detail. These goods are called public goods, where it is non-excludable and non-rival. Now, some goods fall in between. Some goods, they are rival, but they are non-excludable. So my use diminishes your use or your pleasure from using it, but I still cannot stop you from using it. For example, fish in the ocean. If there's limited fish in the ocean and I fish, then the fish available for you is lesser, but it is not excludable. You cannot really stop people from all over the world from fishing in the oceans. So that is a problem where a good is rival, but it is non-excludable. So this is called a common resource. When it is non-excludable and non-rival, it is called a public good. But when it is rival and non-excludable, it is called a common property resource. Then there are something called club goods, which are excludable but not rival. For example, cable television. You can exclude someone, but one person getting it does not really hamper some other person from using it. So today's chapter is more about these kind of goods, public goods and common property resources, goods which are rival but not excludable, or goods which are non-rival and non-excludable. So more focus is on the excludability thing, because when the goods are excludable, you private units, private companies can provide them. So private goods, club goods, private individuals can provide because of their excludability feature. But when goods become non-excludable, then private sector cannot always provide them. So that is why public goods and common goods, common property resources are something that the private sector cannot do. Let's talk about more in detail, and let's talk about why we need the government sector to be proactive in these sectors. All right, so let's kind of do a recap of what we just did. So 4 kinds of goods, right? Private, public, club goods, and common property, right? So there's a road, okay? A road is on which all of us go or a car goes. What is a road? Is it a private good? Is it a public good? Is it a club good? Or is it a common property? So the answer depends on certain things. The answer depends on, is there a toll on the road or not? Is the road congested or not? All right, so that makes it 4 cases. Let's look at the 4 cases. Is there a toll on the road? So toll road meaning you have to pay to get on the road. And congestion meaning that the speed at which I can go is then determined by how many other cars are there on that road. So is it a congested road or not? Okay, so let's get the answer. So is a road rival in consumption? My use of the road does not really impact your use of the road, but it can become rival if it is very congested. If there are too many cars on the road, then like in Bangalore traffic is famous, right? That to get to kind of go for 2 kilometers also, people are taking 2 hours sometimes, right? What does it do? This road is now rival. If I use it, you cannot use it because there are so many of me using it. So congested roads have made a non-rival good into a rival good. Excludable, is it excludable? Then a toll road. If I put a toll on a road, it becomes excludable. That means only people sometimes can use that road, right? Only people who pay for it. So should that be a solution to Bangalore road crisis, congestion crisis, that you put a toll that only certain people, if you pay for the toll, can you use this road? Now, it seems like a very nice answer, but I feel that politically, can you start imposing tolls on roads which were earlier free? Is the public going to accept it? I don't think so. Then it will be straight like, okay, you're reserving premium roads for the rich because they don't mind paying for it. So it's like the premium roads gets reserved for the rich, and then commoners have to use a longer route to get to where they have to. So politically, these are all challenges. They will solve the traffic problem, but implementation is an issue, right? So let's get back to the task at hand. Rival in consumption, is it rival in consumption only if it's congested? Is it excludable if it's a toll road? So let's make four possibilities of a road. What if there is a toll road and it is congested? So then it's a private good. It's a congested toll road, it's a private good. If it's an uncongested toll road, so it is non-rival and it is excludable. Club good. It's rival and excludable. Private good. But what about the other two cases? It is a non-toll road, so it is non-excludable and it is congested. That makes it a common property resource. It's not a toll road, but it is congested. So it's a common property and it's a challenge to manage it. If it's not a toll road and it is not congested, it's a normal public good. So these are four possibilities of what a road could be. A public good, if it's just, you just have to build roads, then you don't have to, there's no problem of charging or congestion. But if you've built a road, but then there's a problem of congestion, that makes it a common property, which you have to now manage. How do you manage a property which is for everybody's use? So it's non-excludable, but excessive use is hampering that. So that's a common property resource. That's a common property challenge. So let's talk more about them. All right, so public goods and common property is what we are going to talk about today because of the non-excludability factor. Now, usually with public goods and common property, there is a challenge. And the challenge is usually arising because of something called externality. When there is a problem of congestion, so right now we spoke about roads could be congested or non-congested. If they're non-congested, no problem. But when they're congested, the problem, we have given a formal name to this problem, and that name is called an externality. What is externality? Externality is that when a good has not just private benefit, but it also has public effects. So a good could be producing a positive externality, or it could be producing a negative externality. I'm sure you've done this before, right? So a good could be producing a positive externality or a negative externality. One of the two. Now, externality means that this good is giving out some benefit or a loss to someone other than its private consumer. All right. So positive externality would mean that, if I have, let's say, I have a farm with a lot of beautiful trees and flowers, and that attracts a lot of birds and bees into my farm. So that's good for the entire ecosystem of that area. But a negative externality is if my farm is very dirty, very smelly. So that breeds, it diseases for everybody around. So but how I keep my land is private, right? If it's a private land, how I keep my land is private. But I produce a positive or a negative externality. So externality arises because something of value has happened and there's no price attached to it, right? So when externalities are involved, then if you keep the market private in that case, the market outcome will be inefficient. So for example, when the government gives a permit to set a factory, there is an externality attached to it. The negative externality could be the pollutants. So it could be air pollution that the factory emits. It could be water pollution. But it's not sort of internalized. The owner of the factory who is doing something on his private property, but he is polluting a common property resource. So that externality is not really taking into account. So when an externality is present, but you still allow individuals to privately decide how much to consume and produce, it will lead to an inefficient outcome. right? For example, the stubble burning in Haryana, which causes the pollution in Delhi. Now, what do you do about it? It's a private decision of the farmers to burn their stubble or not, but it's leading to an externality in Delhi, right? Because of the weather conditions in Delhi, because of the pollution getting trapped in Delhi. So now what? How do you stop those farmers? How do you make those farmers accountable for what's happening in Delhi, right? So now this has become a public good problem, an externality problem. And in that case, in an externality case, you cannot allow just the farmers to do what they want to do, right? That would lead to an inefficient outcome. So now it is in the hands of government to shape policy so that the welfare of everyone rises, right? So that the welfare of the entire community rises, the entire all the residents rise instead of the private individual taking his or her private decision. So with in case of externality, government plays a large role. Now, externalities to be able to kind of decide what to do in case of externalities. Uh, in case of public goods, we have consumption which is excludable, which is non-excludable but rival, right? That when one uses it, the other cannot be, the other loses his ability to use it, but you cannot exclude them. Similarly, in public goods, you cannot exclude someone from using them. The problem with provision of public goods and common property resources by the government is something called the free rider problem. The free rider problem is that a public good, whether or not should be provided for, has to be decided by the government because the private sector will not provide it. If it's free of cost or it's not to be paid for, then the government will not provide it. But will the citizens want it? The citizens want, yes, but what do the citizens want to pay for it? We don't really know. So in case of goods which are non-excludable, we face something called the free rider problem. The free rider problem meaning that everybody wants to receive the benefit, but no one wants to pay for it because you can't really exclude me. So I would not really opt to pay for it, right? So for example, if the government is saying, okay, we'll build a park in your area, would you pay for it? So if a park is built, I may not, you may not be able to exclude me for it, right? From using it if it's a public park. So let's say the government is asking, is it okay if you pay some money for it? So your you may not really say no, I want to pay for it. Who's going to really come forward? I want to pay for it. Nobody wants to pay for it. Everybody wants to use the park for free. But it is beneficial for the park to be built because it is good for the whole community. But who pays for it is going to be a challenge because you can't really make um, any private individual kind of pay for it. So that is why when there's a free rider problem, it is usually the government who should just try to assess whether this good is beneficial for the public or not and provide it. Okay, privately, the free rider problem will not make the provision of it very, very efficient. So the free rider problem is when people can use it but not pay for it, right? Okay, so free rider problem leads to market failure, and the government can take action and it can provide the public goods in case it feels the public wants this good. Now, again, that's a challenge. How does the government understand that should I provide this good or not? Does the public want it? Then the government has to kind of understand what is the benefit of this good and what is the cost. Now the thing is that to measure the benefit of a good is usually very difficult. So let's take an example. The benefit of clean air. How does the government kind of put a number to what is the benefit of clean air, right? It is, if you ask any individual, what is the benefit of clean air to you? And they will say infinite benefit. I want clean air. I want clean air, right? But it's not, you can't really measure it by this. You have to have a very concrete method of measuring. So you kind of try to say ki, okay, if there is no clean air, then there's so many medical casualties, then so many people lose their lives, or so many people are they suffer from diseases, and that then you can provide a measure that, okay, because of lack of clean air, so much loss is happening to the people of Delhi. So that's a way. So usually when you provide for public goods, you can't really give a number to the benefit unless it is estimated using different methods. So there aren't any proper price signals that you can observe while deciding on a public good. It is something to be understand, and you can only make rough approximations. So it is very imprecise, the science, and hence efficient provision of a public good is always more difficult than that of a private good. All right. So, having said that, let's talk about some important public goods that the government does provide for. National defense. So, it's a public good. All of us benefit from it, and it's the government who provides it. No single person is excluded. They may or may not pay for it. The other kind of important public good that the government should provide for is basic research. So, for example, when there is a specialized knowledge that can be used by private companies to patent a good and to supply a good, companies will do that. But what about basic math and literacy skills? Private companies are not going to provide for that unless private individuals pay for it, which is why private schools in India are famous, but government schools in India don't do a great job because people don't really pay for it. So it basic research, basic uh, strengthening the core sciences, just strengthening your basic, not specialized. That is a job of the government. That government has to kind of provide for basic research and provide for universities and jobs in universities and a stable lifestyle to people who want to pursue pure research and not specialized research. So they want to come up with those equations and theorems which will ultimately lead us to probably specialized knowledge, but who will do that basic theorems, who will develop that? So that's kind of the job of the public that comes on the head of the public sector. And again, for the public sector to decide how much of it should they do it, at what cost should they do it, that all then becomes a challenge. That how do individuals value this, and how much should I provide for it? And government has limited resources, so how should they do it? So yeah, that's why it's all of this is an area which needs specialized economists like what you are aiming to be, to understand and provide proper schemes that the government can actually politically and economically implement. All right, anti-poverty programs, food stamp programs, government housing programs. So all of these are public goods. Coming to common property resources, I said, like, they are not excludable, but they are rival. So private firms will not be able to provide for it unless you allow them excludability. And now then it falls on the government to kind of manage a common property. So air is a great example of a common property. It's right now a public good, but that how do you kind of manage it? The dwindling of our animal population, our species, the poaching of tigers and elephants and all those animals. These are all public goods. There's no fixed all right, now let's come to the common property resources. So, common property resources, the problem is overuse of a common property resource. So, you cannot prevent everybody from using it. People don't want to pay by themselves. So, the government has to see how they're provided. So they are rival. If there's overusing, then it will harm everybody together. And it's the role of the government to ensure that they are not overused. Now, there is a parable called the Tragedy of the Commons, and the parable simply says that if there was a town in which sheep were grazing on common land, and it was like a common public good, everybody would could graze as much as they want. But then the population grew, the number of sheep grew, and the land was overgrazed, and then the grass began to disappear because so many sheep were grazing that land, and finally that land became barren. So this is the tragedy of the commons, that a good which was used freely is now become so the non-rival good has now become rival, and now the government has to manage it. So what does how can the government what can the government do to solve this problem? What are the options? The option is that the government has to kind of see how does it reduce the use of that land, because social and private incentives differ. So privately, everybody has an incentive to overuse it, but socially that's inefficient. So how does the government get to the socially efficient outcome, right? There's the negative externality which is present. So when one person uses it, it causes a loss to the other person. So what does the government do to prevent overuse of any common property? So what are the options? The first option is you can regulate the use of the resource. So you can put a tax that on an entrance fee or anything that only then can you use it. So that's like a hunting ground or a toll road or an entrance fee to a national park. And so you put fee. So fee is always a way in which the government regulates the use, but obviously it excludes some people, and politically it may become challenging for the government. You can auction off the permit to use the land. So for a common property, you can say, okay, only you can use the land for some time. So that's auctioning off the use of that land. You can kind of convert this private sort of resource into common property, into private property, and you can sell like small land parcels to everyone, that you sell it, that you kind of, use it individually. So that when it becomes private use, then people will make sure that, this patch of land is well taken care of, and it's not overgrazed, it doesn't become barren. So it's private use will make it survive. Like there is this story that goes that um, there was a time when buffaloes in North America became almost extinct because it was common use, and then everybody kind of was, I think, killing them for food or something. And then there came a law when they started allowing buffaloes to be kept as on the farms as private animals. So they allowed owning of those animals. And when that started, the population of buffaloes and cows kind of skyrocketed, because now everybody took care of their cows to make sure that they didn't become extinct. So, so that is what kind of ownership does. It gives one person the responsibility to take care of that resource, and though it makes it makes it more privatized, but it also makes continuation of something better. All right, so clean air and water are important common resources which need to be managed, and it's the government who has to decide how to kind of, either you can give permits that, okay, you can pollute and you cannot. They could make clean air as a common property of all the citizens, and if anybody's polluting, then he has to pay a tax for it. You use that tax to kind of develop clean technologies and so on. So all of that is the government's job to do. Congested roads, again, how do you kind of change it? Do you charge the driver to drive at a particular time? Do you kind of put prices for timings that, okay, in the peak time, if you use this road, then you have to pay a tax on using cars altogether, and so on. Fishing is something that is, I read somewhere that our whales will become extinct because of the amount of whaling or killing of whales for the amount of resources that are there. I was reading somewhere that lipsticks have this whale fat in it because it makes it very smooth, and some rubbish. So how do you provide for a law which will prevent these endangered animals from being hunted down? Because it's an international thing. You cannot really stop a ship from Norway to enter the ocean. You can't do that. It'll start a war. You need all the kind of nations to agree on it, which is almost impossible. How do you give fishing licenses, hunting licenses? You limit the timings, you limit the seasons, limit the size. Only if you do all of that. And this is an international issue. So how do you kind of deal with an international issue? So all of these are what happens at WTO and what happens at other international organizations. I think today only India rejected some deal where some $320 billion were offered to the southern nations to deal with climate change, and the nations were asking for $1.3 billion, $1 trillion, and so India kind of rejected that deal. So that's what happens at international negotiations. When you have to negotiate, people who are polluting and people who are suffering, they kind of have to come to a conclusion. How you can't force them to do it, so how do you do them? So markets fail when property rights are not established. So right now, when people kind of pollute, there is no property right to free air. Like I don't have a right to the air that is above my head. That okay, this air must be clean. Once you give out property rights, then you can enforce them. Okay, that this is the right of the person, that he has a right to clean air, and if you are polluting it, then you must pay for this much. So the first step in kind of assigning coming to a solution to manage common property resources is to kind of assign property rights. Whose property is this? Some item of value does not have an owner with the legal authority to control. So how do you potentially solve that problem? So government has to kind of define these property rights and regulate their behavior, probably tax them so that the market and do what the market would not do. So thank you, everyone. And, this is what I had to share in chapter 11 of this topic, which is on property resources and public goods. This chapter was essentially about you trying to understand that, common property is not so easy to provide. It always involves some tax on who's using it and some subsidy to who's benefiting from it. So there's an angle that has to be sorted. And the role of the public sector in this larger economics is to provide for those goods which are they are non-excludable, and they may be rival or non-rival. So the government's job is to provide for them those goods which the private market will not efficiently produce. So I hope it was beneficial. This is chapter 11 of Mankiw, DU Sem 1, Introductory Microeconomics. So I hope it was beneficial, and thank you so much. Please follow us for more videos, and keep watching EduSure to enhance your knowledge. Thank you. Bye-bye.